just want to let Richard Asmus mention something, and then Nick Galloway is going to introduce our speaker. So, Richard, I understand there's going to be an American Promise Cincinnati chapter lunch party on Wednesday, and it's here at the Chameleon. And do you want to say anything about that briefly?
Yes, I love this. Here you are is the representative from Move to Amend Ohio, but you're bigger. You're national too. Is that right? Yes. So he'll be introduced. But on Wednesday night, our city is vibrating with this power interest to get big money out of politics, because Wednesday night, right here, 6:30 to 7, is social. 7 o'clock, a young man, Azer Cole, who's the Citizen Empowerment Coordinator for American Promise, as a cousin, sister organization to Move to Amend, is here. So you're welcome if you'd like to learn another very similar, but a little bit different approach, very complementary though, to that. Please come on Wednesday night, 6:30 if you want to get here early a little bit. 7 o'clock the program will start.
Okay, thank you, Richard. I'm going to turn it over to Dick Galloway to introduce our speaker. Dick is one of our founding members and on the leadership team, along with his wife, Karen Galloway. We would not be here without them. I also want to recognize in the audience Crystal Dandridge, and she's starting to come into some of our leadership meetings. We're glad she's here, and we're glad to see so many faces of everyone in the room. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you. Move to Amend is really quite a challenge. We became an affiliate, and there's a lot more to that than we imagined. And they've been kind of pressuring us a little bit to have an educational program. And so mostly, I guess, Karen and others on the leadership team got to talking about it, and we found out that he could come down from Cleveland here to do the educational thing, and it just happened to be on the same afternoon that we have our public meeting. So I thought, well, gee whiz, this could be very fortunate, because we can tie him into this and give him a chance to bring another perspective and so forth. This is a very brilliant, hardworking. He has done so many things. Anybody who worked 30 years with American Friends Service Committee and worked with the National Common Cause, in my book I said that guy's interesting. We met about 3 years ago. We co-facilitated a meeting at the National Move to Amend Conference. He is the leader on the Ohio team for Move to Amend, and I was on that board for a while, or that committee, whatever. Rob is on it now. I am so grateful for this man because he has shared so much with me and helped me broaden my perspective on how we're going to, the importance of this amendment and how we're going to get it passed. So I am just tickled pink, which is so pleased that he gets to be with us here this afternoon and share his wisdom with all of you. Thank you.
Oh, I guess I should be in front, huh?
Good idea.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's very good to be here, and thank you ever so much, Dick and Karen and Deb, for arranging this, and the rest of you for putting up with me earlier this afternoon in spending some time engaging with you, mostly discussing, a little bit cussing, around the issue of where the movement for amending the Constitution should go, how broad and deep and what that should include. And part of that I'm going to battle at you again here today and expand upon it a bit. I want to thank each of you for coming out today. You know, you could be doing a lot of other things than this. Although it's not a bad venue, nice choice, and it's just terrific that you all have chosen to emphasize and prioritize spending time here rather than, I don't know, decorating your house for President's Day. That's what we did with some elevators, right? So, anyway, I presume everyone here is familiar, right, with Move to Amend? You heard about it? Anyone here not know what Move to Amend is about? Let me just, if I might, make sure everybody gets this. Pass it over to the other side, maybe. All right, that's a little piece of propaganda, information that hopefully everyone has that I will make reference to. And, what I want to make some comment about, and then we get into discussing and strategizing, agreeing or disagreeing, is about what Move to Amend is focused on. We are a group that has been around since the day of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. That famous or infamous day, almost 10 years ago. It's 9 years ago, a few weeks ago, but later this year, Move to Amend will be celebrating its 10th anniversary, when people came together, seeing sort of what was on the horizon with the Supreme Court, realizing that this was not particularly going to go the people's way, and deciding we needed to affirmatively try to be ready for what we thought would be a terrible decision. And thus, this group did organize, and on the very day of the decision in January of 2010, launched our website, launched our campaign, got people upwards of 50,000 within 48 hours to sign an online petition saying that this was a terrible decision and we needed to not only reverse it, but to go beyond that and focus on a couple of themes I'm going to talk about today. Certainly big money elections, you've heard a lot about that. You'll be hearing a bit more, but not only that, but Move to Amend distinguishes itself in terms of the constitutional amendment route as opposed to the legislative route, as opposed to simply electing better candidate route. All of those things are important and need to be done. Yes, we need to elect better candidates. Yes, we need to elect better people to represent us at every level of government. Yes, we need to have better laws. Yes, we need to have better regulations, but we need also to change the fundamental rules of the game, and that's what constitutions are. And so Move to Amend is the constitutional amendment group that not only calls for amending the Constitution to end big money elections by abolishing this bizarre constitutional doctrine that money is equivalent to free speech, but also the, what we believe, equally bizarre and never intended notion that corporations have inalienable constitutional rights that were meant and intended under the Bill of Rights, under the 14th Amendment, under other provisions of the Constitution, intended solely and exclusively for human beings. But Move to Amend also believes that that is simply not enough, that we need to focus on creating, not recreating, not reestablishing, not reclaiming, but creating, for the very first time, real, authentic democracy for all. Not just for some, but for all. And I want to just kind of start by focusing and building out these three themes by talking about a tremendous institution in this community. Some of you maybe have heard about it. It's called the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. Have you heard that?
Go ahead.
Yeah. An institution that celebrates and commemorates just a tremendous effort on the part of the people to stand up, speak out, act up for bringing about change. And to, as this historical Freedom Center does, focus on a bit of history that is quite grisly. And the points I want to make, 4 of them, about this center that I think is very applicable for our topic today, is that those in this museum had the privilege of my daughter a year and a half ago to visit it, and looking at it sort of through the lens of Move to Amend and our constitutional effort to abolish corporate constitutional rights and limit money to speech and create democracy authentically for the very first time are these. First, that we never had from day one a constitution that respected the rights of everyone. That this was a constitution from day one that affirmed the personhood rights of a very small number of people, that did not include people of color, that did not include enslaved people. In fact, it reinforced the institution of slavery, and in fact said that even if people who were enslaved escaped, they could be returned, the Return Servants Clause. And that was affirmed through constitutional decisions like the infamous or famous Dred Scott decision of 1857. So not all people were people. Only about 5% or so, white, male, property owners, had full personhood rights. Everybody else was less than a person. If it was a woman, well, hey, that goes back to biblical times, right? You're just nothing more than starting out as being a rib of the God of Adam, and didn't have rights under the Constitution, basically only those that the men had as extension. Slaves were, for purposes of voting, this is where we got the whole, the whole electoral college thing, where 3/5 of a person, not even a 4/5, but a 3/5 of a person. That was just simply for the purposes of vote counting, to give Southern plantation owners, and that's why most of these first presidents, right, Jefferson, Addison, Monroe, were all from Virginia, slaveholding states. So that was mighty convenient. Well, Native people, they weren't any fraction of a person. 3/5, 2/5, 1/5, they were considered as beasts, less than even human beings. So one of the takeaways that I got from that museum was the fact that people weren't people. They were considered property of the owners. And that what we're trying to do is affirm the rights, the inalienable rights of all people. What are those last 4 words of the Pledge of Allegiance?
Justice for all.
And justice for all. What a radical concept. Justice for all. Takeaway number 1. Takeaway number 2. Those who were working to deal with slavery didn't Mickey Mouse around by saying, let's sort of figure out some ways to, legislatively sort of improve the situation. Let's create a slavery protection agency. Let's call for legislation that says that slaves can only be beaten every other day. That their children, only half of whom can be sold to other people as slaves. And other sort of reasonable things. Those things that are considered practical. Those things that at the moment we can get through Congress. Because we have to be real, we have to take what we can get right now. That's humane. That's right. No, they didn't do it. People who were against slavery were against fundamentally and profoundly the institution of slavery, all of its forms, and took the unapologetic, bold, and extremist, and dare I say, radical position that human beings are human beings and should all be treated with inalienable constitutional rights, and therefore the institution of slavery, remember, slavery goes back to day one. How can you change this? It's embedded in the culture not only of this country, but almost every country, supposedly. Be practical, be realistic, nonsense. They went for it all. Number 3. Many, as celebrated in that museum, were involved in, what's the name of it? The Underground Railroad. What was that Underground Railroad? An effort, right? An effort. 700 of them, in fact, here in Ohio, of people who chose to quarter slaves that were being brought across that Ohio River, supposedly to freedom, but of course, they weren't free when they came to Ohio. They weren't free until they got to Canada. Because again, you were simply property. And if you were quartering somebody else's property, you could be fined, if not worse. And so those who were quartering illegal slaves' property, stolen property, were committing acts of civil disobedience. They were acting against the law, against the Constitution, because they felt it was so important. They just didn't simply write letters, or just simply contact their congresspeople, or simply rally on the corner to talk and call for it. All of those happened. And there was mass petitioning. And here in Ohio, among many states in particular, there was tremendous efforts by religious leaders, Methodists and Presbyterians and Quakers and Unitarians to quarter, but also to talk about and educate and try to change the culture. All of that's important, but let's not forget that there were people that were willing to literally put their necks on the line and commit illegal acts. Those against the law was not against their own sense of what was considered to be fundamentally and profoundly right and moral and just. And finally, just sort of interesting note, most of those who were focusing at that time to end slavery were Republicans. You know, Abe Lincoln, Republican. Though some may claim that his effort at calling for the end of slavery was merely to keep the Union together as opposed to fundamentally being opposed to slavery. Yeah, he was against that. But many people believe historically that his primary motive was just to keep the Union together. But nevertheless, the James Madison of the 14th Amendment, the guy who wrote that post-slavery, post-Civil War, one of the three post-Civil War amendments that ended slavery, right, 13th, 14th, and 15th, 14th Amendment being calling for free black slaves to have due process and equal protection under the law, was a guy named John Bingham, a Republican congressperson, the James Madison of the 14th Amendment, from Ohio, from southern Ohio somewhere, I don't know where he was from. But it was many of the Republicans at that time who were at that time, remember, they were the radicals. They were the outlaws. It was those Democrats in the South that wanted to protect the institution of slavery. Now, they weren't perfect. Some of it was politically motivated, to be sure. No question about it. But nevertheless, there was that. So, I maybe elaborated a little too long on that. But it's to make a point. And that is that Move to Amend is operating within that spirit. And I am sad, actually, not to have had this other speaker show up to talk about the 19th Amendment, because a very similar sort of trajectory occurred among women and their effort at trying to gain, after 72 years, the right to vote, which included Susan B. Anthony, whose birthday was on Friday, illegally voting, committing civil disobedience, got fined $100, which she never paid, and which was never persecuted on because they didn't want to throw her in jail and make her a martyr. So they just dropped the whole thing. But the point being, there was a similar arc in terms of women in their movement saying, gee, women weren't given fundamental rights in the Constitution. Women were calling for sort of half-assed approaches to change. Women were committing civil disobedience, right and left, including Alice Paul, who was a Quaker, right up until sort of just before the 19th Amendment came to pass, was having to be forced fatty, as she chose to violate and go on a hunger strike, and many others. And of course, it was Democratic Woodrow Wilson at the time who was not inclined to sign and support the 19th Amendment. Some Republicans, some Democrats, sort of nonpartisan effort there. But the point being The point being that in times of dramatic and serious problems, fundamental and profound problems and crises call for fundamental and profound and transformative solutions. And that's what we believe the Move to Amend approach is all about. And actually, in the minds of some, young people in particular, and let's be real, the young people of today, and we're just starting to see the political glimmer, believe that some of the stuff that even Move to Amend is talking about is way too moderate and timid compared to the relative crises that we are facing. Crises that they are inheriting that we, our generation, has screwed up. The existential environmental crisis that is destroying the planet. A good deal of which is caused by corporate plunder. Economic crisis, in which somehow, some way, people have justified that we can have perpetual growth on a finite planet. Do the math on that. That somehow we can just have ever more growth everywhere. I mean, just like 7% growth, or just like 15 years doubles. It's just crazy. There's no way physically that can happen. But that's how the economy is built. And that somehow we can perpetually continue to spend more money in elections, give corporations more power, and still have a functional democracy. Right? That's sustainable. Right? We know that. We are facing those and very many other profound crises, some of which, any one of which, is significant, but any one of which could trigger some of the others. I mentioned sort of the constitutional crisis that we've been having to deal with the last year or so, and that we're seeing now. And I mean, just think of the whole Kavanaugh thing, whether you supported him or not. It shouldn't have had that much import, given that other countries really have very different ways of dealing with Supreme Court justices. Ours is quite unique in having these guys and gals being appointed, anointed, selected, elected for life. In most other countries, they're either, you get a certain age, you're out. You get a certain number of they have terms, you're out. Or you come up in so many years, and you have to sort of reapply before Congress and the executive or the parliament. Ours is pretty unique and is shared by other countries that many along the political spectrum would be called sort of dictatorial. So I mean, there's some constitutional problems as well. Any one of these could cause a fundamental crisis, but any one of these could trigger any of the others, which necessitates people of conscience to respond in kind. That if we have a serious problem of this magnitude, our response needs to be of an equivalent magnitude. And we believe that given the fundamental crisis, that exists in whatever degree of democracy we ever had, which arguably, unless you were a white male property owner, wasn't a whole hell of a lot to begin with, then we're going to see some serious problems. And it's going to trigger some disillusionment. We already see disillusionment, but mass action that is going to call for, and we're already seeing it, young people who are coming together, who are, and it's just, I think we're just sort of scratching the surface around this stuff, around the Green New Deal, and young people in the United Kingdom who are teenagers now, who are meeting almost every day in front of Parliament. It's just incredible, the kind of response. You have young people now who are fundamentally questioning the whole economic system of perpetual growth, whether it's under a Western capitalist model or a Soviet state model. In essence, they both have this notion of we can sort of grow ourselves out of any problem. And people, Democratic Socialists of America, young people sort of on the political left, focusing on that. And let's not forget how the Occupy movement and the Tea Party movement had a whole heck of a lot more in common, at least initially, than they had a difference, in that they both came about in opposing the 3 or 4, I can't remember now, page bailout of the banking institutions back in 2007. That Hank Paulson tried to ram through Congress and was opposed by, it's my congressperson up in Cleveland area, she was getting 100 calls in opposition to 1 in support. 100 to 1. They had to back down, they waited, they came back, still pretty much rammed it through. Both Occupy and Tea Party was against that, believing that the banksters should not be bailed out. They should be held accountable and responsible. You want corporate constitutional rights? You want all those goodies? Fine. But you should have certain responsibilities. It shouldn't be all about if you win, you gain. If you lose, we pay. And that's kind of how that system was. And pretty much still remains. Think about our friends at, Wells Fargo Corporation. Let's just pull it back out of the air. Wells Fargo Corporation. How are they doing? Time after time after time, they have stiffed their own customers. And yet, what do they do? Hand slap, pretty much. Minor fine, pretty much. You want to call yourself a person, there are many states that have 3 strikes and you're out. They should have been out and with the key thrown away a long time ago. So they want it both ways. When it's convenient, they want to be treated as a person. But when not convenient, then, they're separate from being a person. They are separate from legally in the law. Well, I somewhat digress. But not really. Right? We believe, to amend, that our approach in trying to create a movement that not only focuses on ending money in elections, but corporate constitutional rights, and trying to address fundamental problems associated with lack of personhood from day one that has negatively impacted from day one people of color, women, people of different sexual orientation, people of different physical orientation, people of different religion, that all of those groups, all of those constituencies are constituencies that are absolutely essential. It's the only way. If we're serious in creating a mass movement effectively to bring about change. And history shows it. I mean, don't look now, but the registered number of people in the Democratic or Republican parties both are declining. People are not self-identified as either D's or R's. They are increasingly looking for that which is going to bring about change. So it's important to focus on issues, and it's important to focus on the values underlying issues, and that is why we believe, and have always believed, one of our basic values, that we must create an intergenerational and multicultural movement from the start. Never mind, and we could spend a whole lot of time, and I touch a little bit on the morality of it and the ethics of it. Let's just talk about strategy. What's the demographics of this country at the moment? Where is it headed? Within a couple of years, not that far out. It ain't going to be Caucasian as a majority. It's going to be people of color, historically. And therefore, unless we figure out a way to speak to give space for, to listen to lift up to make connections with those issues, those problems, those concerns of younger people, but also people who've been historically oppressed. To not only listen, but to give a seat at the table so that their voices are not just sort of paternalistically being listened to or heard, but authentically included in the strategy, in the tactics. That's the only way that their respective constituencies are going to fall into line. I mentioned in the earlier group there's been some research done about the history of social change. There's a fairly young woman named Erica Chenoweth, who is a Gulf War vet, who's done some research on nonviolent social change, who has said that in looking at social movements and fundamental transformation, both in this country and abroad, she has found, and those researchers underneath her have found that you need like two conditions, two variables to bring about the necessary power. And that's what we're talking about. You know, we can try to help these elected officials see the light. But if they don't see the light, then we got to make sure they feel the heat. And to make sure they feel the heat, you got to build power. And those who've come before us, who've been stiffed from day one in terms of social movements, have understood the notions of building power to bring change, whether it's people who were working at abolishing slavery, or women, or people who wanted to have rights in the workplace, in the whole labor union movement, environmental movement, those efforts to try to end illegal wars and occupations, and just a whole scan and spectrum on both left and right. Efforts have required certainly power, but power is derived, as Erica Chenoweth, comes from two sources. One, you gotta have the majority of people on your side. No question. That helps change the culture. To change things, you've got to change behaviors, and to change behaviors, you got to change the culture. To change the culture, you got to change the institutions. You know? So we're trying to change the institutions. We're trying to amend the Constitution. So a prerequisite for that is you got to have the numbers, at least people who are on your side, in terms of filling out petitions, polls, and all that. But that by itself ain't enough. You got to have, and she computed in those who she worked with, the number was 3.5%. 3.5% of the people out there have got to be kick-ass committed. They've got to be willing to really, to be sort of the underground railroad types of the anti-slavery movement, or the women in the suffragette movement who were willing to, at great risk, visibly go out and protest, if not be arrested and be force-fed. Not always, that extreme, but pretty much take some social risks beyond the safety zone. And generally, people like that, in that second category, are the people who have been most egregiously harmed by whatever it is you're talking about. And historically, those who have been most harmed from the past up to the present by the multi-facets of corporate power, of corporate constitutional rights, and of money in elections, are people without money, obviously, people without economic power, economic leverage, people who are trying to make it day to day, people who are people of color, who in many other ways have seen efforts to consciously and intentionally be denied the right, or I don't know, to register to vote, or to vote. Women, of course, that whole movement, and other groups that have been denied legally the right of being people. And that is why we believe, not just part and parcel for moral and ethical, but for strategic reasons, and looking at the demographics, and realizing where young people are. People are looking for things that are transformative. Now, I just want to spend a minute, and then we can kind of wrap up and go at it. People understand, right? People get, most people, without too much awareness, kind of get the money in elections piece of it, right? Goes back to 2 Supreme Court decisions, one in the both of them in the 1970s, one that gave corporations the right, for the very first time, to spend money in elections for ballot initiatives. That was the First National Bank for Cincinnati decision in 1978, I believe, and 2 years before that was this famous or infamous decision, Buckley versus Vallejo, that equated literally money as free speech. You know, there were a bunch of mishmash stuff that in some cases said, yeah, you can't regulate and limit money in this way, but you can't do it that way. But the point being, it really opened the door to having money being defined as free speech. Last time I checked, money is property, not speech, and money is speech. Those who have the most money are speech. Not a real good definition of anything approaching a democratic republic. So people kind of get that, they understand that, and I get it. I understand why that is so popular and why some groups would want to focus on that. And that alone, because actually, when that Citizens United decision happened, which kind of worsened it, for a lot of people, that was the very first time that they felt that their voice was not being authentically heard. In 2010, that was the very first time many people felt their voices were not heard. Compare that now to many of the groups who have been historically oppressed in so many ways. They snickered at that. They said, join the crowd. Join a reality that has been all too real for us, that goes back for a century or more. But nevertheless, that is important as a piece of what needs to be done. But we also need to address this other that's a little harder to grasp. This notion that because, I don't know, I have no clue what the Supreme Court was drinking, sniffing, infusing, whatever it was at the time, where somehow they concocted the notion that legal pieces of paper, that's what a corporation is, nothing more than a document. A document that is issued by the state, that is given a group of people who want to form a business or form an organization, it's a nonprofit, to do some useful production of a product or service. Well, that's fine. That gets its license to exist by the state. That's what a corporation is. That somehow that document, that license, that piece of paper should have inalienable constitutional rights akin to human beings. Not the people within the corporation, because they still have their rights, and they can do whatever they want to do and lobby on behalf of the company. No, we're talking about the document, the piece of paper, the license that was given the power, the authority, the right, the inalienable constitutional right that was intended solely and exclusively under the Bill of Rights, that has been misused, abused, hijacked, perverted, captured, usurped, pick your favorite adjective, to describe taken over by corporations to use against us. And that's why this second feature, and if you look at this brochure handed out, and you open it up, this red panel focuses on what the We the People amendments, which is what Move to Amend is proposing. And you will see that there's two sections to it, and the first is this radical radical notion that only human beings should have inalienable constitutional rights. And the reason for that is because we'll never have truly representative public officials and prevent the flood of corporate money into elections as long as corporations possess First Amendment free speech rights. That's the Bellotti decision. We'll never know all the poisons in our food as long as corporations possess First Amendment not to speak rights. There have been a number of cases that have said, you have the audacity as a community or a state to say you want to know what's in the food that consumers are eating? How dare you? That violates my First Amendment corporation's right not to speak, which of course the courts went along with. And thus, corporate rights transcended people's rights concerning health, safety, and welfare. We'll never have workplace and environmental safety as long as corporations possess Fourth Amendment search and seizure rights. There have been efforts to try to have regulatory agencies go in and inspect businesses concerning workplace safety or environmental safety. Nope, can't do it. Goes against my corporate Fourth Amendment search and seizure rights. The number of banking corporations here in Ohio, I wrote a booklet about sort of the history of corporations in Ohio. It's a shameless promotion of $2 over here on the table. And there are a number of instances where banking corporations that were chartered, democratic instruments of charters, that's what they were, right at the start, their books had to be opened from day one. Well, once a month they had to be put out in the lobby for inspection. So that if there was any kind of mischief stuff, like what Wells Fargo has done, or I don't know, in the past, wouldn't that have been nice to have known, say, during the days of Enron and some of these other instances? No? But you can't do it because of Fourth Amendment rights. We'll never be able to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our communities if corporations possess Fifth Amendment takings rights. So, a regulation, I think somebody in our small group talked about where they were in some West Virginia, I think we were talking about the state having the audacity to try to regulate and prevent mining companies from mining on property that might, result in the property imploding. Can't do it, because to do so would violate the company's Fifth Amendment takings rights. And look, you can do it, but you have to compensate that company not just for present profits loss, but for all future profits loss, which for a small mining town might amount to the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. Who can afford that? Corporations. We'll never have the power at the local level to give preferential treatment to local businesses over mega chain stores if corporations possess 14th Amendment equal protection rights. Here, a number of instances. Communities, those communities, again, that somehow have humored themselves into believing that they could give preferential treatment to local businesses. Those rights to do that and giving extra protections, say tax breaks or low-interest special loans to low businesses. Sorry, you can't do that, because to give preferential treatment to a local business and not a big box store coming in is violating a corporation's 14th Amendment equal protection rights. 14th Amendment due process equal protection meant exclusively for free black slaves. And finally, we'll never, and it's not finally, there are others, I'm just thinking here, we'll never have the right to prevent toxic waste from being dumped into our communities as long as corporations continue to hijack the Commerce Clause to promote corporate rights over human rights. So, communities, there have been many that have tried to prevent local trash from coming in to their communities. Their local dump sites from out of state. I get from New Jersey, which is like the center of toxic trash, it seems. And can't do it. Because to do so, again, communities that have supposedly the police power in their own local charter, an elected official sort of says that you have the right to protect the health, safety, and welfare of your community. Sorry, that right is preempted by the corporate right because it's not poisonous trash, it's commerce. And therefore it comes under the Commerce Clause. So that is why we believe, and I apologize for laboring this point, but that's why we believe it's so important to address ending all forms of corporate constitutional rights, because if you only deal with the money of speech, then guess what? Post-28th Amendment, if it only deals with money elections, and you only have one shot, generationally. You know, an amendment is different than a law. A law, you can try to work your way up to. You can try to get 10% of what you want, 10% of what you want this year, 20% the year after, 30% the year after that. Not so with the constitutional amendment. You only get one crack at it. Shouldn't be regarded. We believe so. Otherwise, we'll have to wait another generation or more. We don't believe that pathetic activists, we don't have the time, number one, but we're selling ourselves short. We're censoring ourselves, we believe, if we do anything less. Let me just add real quickly, because I know this has come up in a community like this, about the importance of focusing on trying to appeal. That makes perfect sense. Try to appeal to people who are maybe not of the same ideological persuasion as some of us who are those far lefty, off the charts, vegan-loving, radicals. Right? That there are a few others out there. And so, come up with sort of 10 points. I can find them here. On why I think ending money elections and particularly corporate constitutional rights is a conservative issue politically. I don't like to get into conservative or liberal because we've already seen that sort of blown out of the water on many issues over the last year. I mean, think about trade, think about interventions and war. I mean, the whole thing is just being kind of refashioned and saying, well, this is sort of a right issue and this is sort of a left issue, is I think boxing ourselves mentally into compartments that no longer work. Which is also why we think we should focus and stay focused on the issue. Nevertheless, here's 10 points, I believe, of why this issue appeals to people who are more principled conservatives. That yeah, we need to focus on moving people, on shifting people more toward the center. But I think principally, our job is to move the center. And if you move the center, then guess what? The narrative, the norm, the default becomes a lot more, I believe, where it needs to be, toward transformational change and not nickel and dime. Because right now the political center is, it would be pretty hard to get anything less than saying Mother Teresa was a saint through Congress, it used to be, it was pretty tough to get that agreed to by both houses of Congress. All right, so we need to move on this. Anyway, here's ways I think that are both appealing to conservatives but also transformation. One, this is not how it once was. Corporations aren't mentioned in the Constitution. Corporate charters were Democrat, I've already mentioned this, were democratic instruments. Again, plenty of examples in the book, only too much. Plenty of examples in the book about charters listed the terms. How many people here are professionals that require a license to do business in Ohio? Okay? It's a license. If you don't prescribe and follow the license, you can't practice whatever it is you are. That's what a charter was. It was establishing the terms for businesses to exist. You follow the terms, you can do business. You don't follow the terms, you are dissolved. And that dissolution of corporations, the revoking of corporate charters happened by D's, by R's, across the board, by elected officials, and by courts, including the Ohio Supreme Court, and many others. 2, corporations were anointed corporate constitutional rights not by legal people or elected officials, or through past laws, or at the ballot box. No Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, green, red, blue, any other person who self-identifies with any political party has ever passed a law No citizen movement has ever passed a citizen initiative calling for corporate constitutional rights. It has only happened by activist Supreme Court justices who have created this notion literally again. And what they were smoking, infusing, sniffing, but they created it out of thin air. Corporations were founded. And for those who are always against activist Supreme Court justices, here's exhibits A, B, C, D, E, all the way through Z, and we can start all over again. Because the courts have affirmed in many ways, never intended, inalienable rights that, again, corporations aren't mentioned in the Constitution anywhere. 3, polling regarding corporate power. In November, the Open Markets Institute, a business group, released new evidence of increased corporate concentration in 32 different industries, from cell phone providers to peanut butter. I didn't know 4 firms control 92% of peanut butter. According to the survey conducted in September by the Public Policy Poll, 76% of respondents were either somewhat or very concerned that, quote, big corporations have too much power over your family and your community. The figure grew when asked whether big corporations have too much power over politicians, a stunning 88%, or at least somewhat concerned. And that number is just growing because of the malfeasance and the abuses and the misuses of the law by corporations. 4, prominent conservatives and Republicans. Listen to what some of these folks have said. Abe Lincoln, quote, "We may congratulate ourselves that this cruel war is nearing its end. It has cost a vast amount of treasure and blood. It has indeed been a trying hour for the Republic, but I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of my country. As a result of the war, corporations have been enthroned in an era of corruption. High places will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until all wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed. I feel at this moment more anxiety for the safety of my country than ever before. Even in the midst of war, God grant my suspicions may prove groundless." And secondly, Teddy Roosevelt, in his new nationalism speech of 1910, quote, "The true friend of property, the true conservative is he who insists that property shall be the servant and not the master of the Commonwealth, who insists that the creation and the creature of man's making shall be the servant and not the master of the man who made it. There can be no effective control over corporations while their political activity remains. To put an end to it will be neither a short nor an easy task, but it can be done," unquote. So he, as well as many others, including Movement, I'm not trying to put corporations out of business. They can continue to exist. They just can't have inalienable constitutional rights that include political rights. So conservatives, Republicans, each president saying that was appropriate. They quote 2 Republicans. 5, local community rights movement. I mentioned this earlier. There's something, maybe some of you have heard, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, a group that exists, sort of was born in rural Pennsylvania, and they're all about sort of trying to strengthen the ability of local municipalities, local townships, to keep corporations, keep corporate entities out of their communities by saying that we have the right to decide under the police powers of our community what should go on. I won't go into it, but just check out, just Google Community Rights Movement, Community Rights Network, or CELDF, CELDF, and you will see the swath of efforts and of ordinances that have been passed. Now, many of them have been thrown out. Why? Again, because corporations have these never intended rights that overturn and preempt the local right to decide by many local communities, most of whom in rural places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Iowa and Washington are headed up by Republicans. 6, farmers. The National Farmers Alliance, which goes back to sort of the Cleburne demands, were maybe the first, right? These were supposed to be stupid, dumb, illiterate people. They don't understand anything, right? That's sort of what too many people think of farmers. Nonsense. They got it. They understood back then, 100 years ago. They created this populist party. They created this list of demands. Look at the Populist Party platform of 1892. It talks about controlling corporations, right and left, and even to this day, in recent times, farmers, many states in the Midwest, Nebraska, Dakotas, and Iowa, and others have passed initiatives banning non-family farm-owned agribusinesses. You don't own the land, you can't work it. Seems pretty reasonable. Unfortunately, many of those instances have been challenged yet again by corporate constitutional rights and have been thrown out. 7, small businesses. The American Independent Business Alliance, Businesses for Sustainable Development, other small business organizations and coalitions of small businesses understand they're not the ones that are flexing their corporate constitutional rights and muscles to buying, renting, leasing, or retaining public officials. They're just trying to stay in business. And they're having a tough time doing it, an increasingly tough time, as the Amazons and Walmarts come in, either physically to take over the downtown, or now electronically and, drone delivery and all this other nonsense that is in the offing. Small businesses understand that there is this thing called not just capitalism, but crony capitalism. That when the big guys are the ones that are perverting the body politic through campaign contributions and through going to court and using constitutional rights, they don't have a chance. 8, ballot initiatives. You see across the country, in communities, right, left, center, politically, that communities where something like this that calls for ending corporate constitutional rights and money elections passes. Overwhelmingly, again, not to be partisan about it, but even communities a number of years ago that went for Romney over Obama, these things pass. And they pass by not trying to obscure, not trying to push, not trying to remarket what we call for, but being directly upfront and say, we don't believe corporations should be people. Do you? Who should have more rights in our society? Corporations or you? It all depends how the question is asked. Right? You can water it down and make it mealy mouth, or you can be blunt and direct. And we think the best educational approach is to be blunt and direct and call the question, and if nothing else, you're educating people. 9, other Move to Men groups. There are other Move to Men groups in some rural areas. I'm the National Outreach Director now. The last year or so, I've been to a Move to Men affiliate in northeastern Pennsylvania, in Idaho, in central Illinois. And all of these groups are sort of facing and trying to figure out how do we talk about this. But they think, and in Iowa, in a number of places. And they're all saying, okay, bring it on. Let's figure out how we talk about this. But let's not give up talking about this. It's too important. We have to deal with this issue. We can't ignore it. We can't say, let's sort of deal with something else first, and we'll get to this later on. They deal with it head on. And so I think that's worthwhile to contemplate. And last, the We the People Amendment is conservative. Because it's calling for going back to what time once was. Corporations at one time didn't have constitutional rights. Money at one time wasn't defined as free speech. It was only through this escaping of corporations from the legislative arena to the courts, where by going to the courts, now all of a sudden these corporate entities are protected by a moat, by a shield, by a, dare I say, wall? I don't know. Maybe I won't. But by all of these protections, protections that make it impossible for us to get at. And all we can do then as citizens is sort of not be citizens anymore, but be spectators. And either boo or cheer from the stands. We can't be on the field. That's not how it once was. We were on the field. And what this would do is put us back on the field. It would shift decision-making back from the courts, from the judicial arena, back to the legislative arena, where it once was, where it was intended to be, where it started out. What can be more conservative than that? I simply end by inviting you to sign the petition and consider doing what you can to commit or recommit to dealing with what we feel is an issue that is for our time. It's Black History Month. There were a number of things here. I'll just simply add that one of the things that King talked about in one of his talks was the fierce urgency of now. He gave it in his talk before the Riverside Church, given on the day, 1 year to the day before he was assassinated in New York City. He talked about the triple evils, right? Of racism, poverty, militarism, and spoke about that the fierce urgency of now was to deal with the totality of the lack of human rights of people of color, and not to just sort of deal with partialness, not just go for the white power structure you're talking about. You know, no, you can hold on, you can wait. No, we waited way too long. Now is the time. Now is the time. Now is the time.
Dan's got it. It'll be posted on Facebook, will it not?
If I can get my sister to do it, yeah.
Okay, we'll find a way. So, perfect thing. Wouldn't you like to have him your personal guest for a house party? And spread the word? Great. I hope we can get you back to Cincinnati.
You can do this for a house party.
Yes.
It's the Move to Amend, 28 minutes, so it's short, to the point, and it doesn't babble and ramble like I did. So it's to the point. You can take one, or if you want to give us $5, that's fine.
Okay, so thank you so much, Greg, for talking. I think we have a few minutes, about 15 minutes, if we have questions and answers to go through. And I'll give a thank you ahead of time to Alberta Hunsley if she ends up putting that on Facebook, because I sure don't know how. So I'll pass the mic around to anyone who puts up a hand and see if Greg here can help answer questions.
Rights should be included in the 28th Amendment. And I just, I think part of it is, you know, as I tried to utter, there's only been 27 of these things so far, and 10 of them came all at once. First 10 amendments. So we only had 17 instances where we had constitutional amendments. If we think that this is a problem of a serious nature that deserves some fundamental action more than simply a law or a regulation, then we're going to have to go to the amendment rounds. And if we're going to go to the amendment rounds, look in the history books, and look at how often they happen, not all that often. We can't afford not to do all that we can all at once. And I think, again, if you're looking at where the arc of, and it's hard to know for sure, where sort of the culture and the awareness and the magnitude of energy and direction of energy is going to go over the next couple of years. But my sense is, as it was a number of years ago, when it came, I worked a lot on local campaign financing, finance reform for a number of years. And at some point, we were trying to get public financing of elections passed. This was in the city of Akron, and we did some internal polling. And what we found at a certain point was that when we focused on the incremental, let's just only try to limit the amount of money that individuals can give, or parents can give, or, limit this time of the year that can be given, versus, no, we want football and financing. That the more sweeping approach was where people were at. That they were tired. They were seeing the flaws and the empty efforts that the incremental approaches will take. And I think if you just ask yourself, let's be real, there's been all of these groups working on all of these efforts to try to stop one harm at a time by all of these conventional approaches. How are we doing? How successful have we been? Are we moving further or closer to real representative democracy? Maybe it's the time to take the more fundamental, transformative approach, because that's not only the right approach to take, it maybe is the most popular approach to take.
This is a good segue. Your agendas list these three organizations: Common Cause Ohio, League of Women Voters Ohio, Ohio Environmental Council. These were the three main organizations last year that were behind the anti-gerrymandering fair districts. They were behind that in the primary last May. So I would encourage everyone, if you haven't already, consider taking the agenda home and write these folks and encourage them to do something to get big money out of politics. Sorry, did you have a question?
I'm Bill Miller. We met at Miami University Scribble Forum. This is my wife.
Good to see you both again. Yes, great.
I'm the Vice President of Ohio Farmers Union, and as you probably know, the Farmers Union unanimously endorsed the move to amend. And it was about 2 or 3 years ago. And I think we need to have you back for a refresher, because I think what happens is a lot of, come and make a presentation. You didn't make the presentation, somebody else did. And I think, it sort of slips from their minds over time. One of the issues that we've dealing with, and it's up in your area with regards to the environmental issues of Lake Erie and the Great Lakes. And I don't know if you know, but very, very recently, a number of the environmental groups have reached out and are talking about taking the Great Lakes and developing a corporation around the Great Lakes as a way to protect the Great Lakes from the the environmental problems that are being created by the corporations that pollute the watershed. So I don't know if you're aware of that, and that's very recent development. And I guess my question is, how do you respond to those good government groups that are desperate to protect the environment and see the protections that are afforded the corporations as a way that they could possibly go?
No, I'm glad you really brought that up. Your first point about it's so easy to kind of get to sort of singer to hear something, but then reality calls. There have been over the last couple of years so many on top of one another crises, things that we have been called to respond and react and resist and do all of that defensive stuff. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of opposing. I want to be in a position of proposing. And that's what this is all about. Proposing something that's more than just putting out a fire, pulling somebody out from a lake or river or wherever, but really trying to change, who are the arsonists that create the fire, who are the people who are throwing people in the water upstream. We need to propose, we need to focus. And that's what this is. Now, your point about what's called the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. This effort that this group, community rights group, this CELDF group is behind, Again, if you put Community Bill of Rights or Lake Erie Bill of Rights, you'll get a number of articles, including from the Toledo Blade, that's done a pretty good job of it. They're saying, they're pushing back to try to say, you know, the harm that is being caused, in this case, by all the runoff from crap coming from big ag farmers that's ending up in rivers and it ends up in Lake Erie, is potentially going to destroy. We can't afford to do anything less than do what the nation of Ecuador has done, and some other places that have now said, we are putting into our federal constitution, giving nature standing. Obviously, a river can't speak for itself, but others can speak for it. And so that's what this is attempting to do, to say, you know, don't look now, folks, but as we lose water from all over places, the Great Lakes is one of the largest sources of fresh water on the planet. And Nestle Corporation and others are pulling water from it over the watershed illegally against the Lake Erie Compact. It is time to do more than just ticky-tack legislative stuff. We are thinking big. We are having a vision. We are dreaming about this. And it won't become reality until you first have a dream, have a vision, and then go big. The problem is big. We can't afford to do anything less than commensurate. And so this, and it fought like hell to get it on the ballot. The state Supreme Court finally agreed with the initiators to put it on the ballot. It's up for a vote in a couple weeks. We'll see how it goes. It could be transformative.
I think Dick wants to respond to that. This is wonderful to hear about someone else having a dream in February. And I want you to know, I'm a farmer's daughter. I'm very glad you're here.
One of my favorite quotes just kind of really sums up what Craig shared with me today. It's by John Stuart Mill. He was a political philosopher in England, I believe, in the 1700s. And he said, against a great evil, a small effort will not produce a small result. It will produce no result at all.
We've got Professor Emeritus Peter Rhodes.
I just think in terms of arguing about this, it's important to keep stressing the literally murderous love of profits. I'm haunted by Clement's example of Lewis Powell. He was CEO of Philip Morris, the company that killed both my parents, and what motivated him was attempts to end advertisement focused on children, because they know if you don't start smoking before you're 18, you won't smoke. And then he's made this memo, which anyone who wants, I'd be glad to send this amazing memo that he sends to the head of the Chamber of Commerce, and then is appointed to Supreme Court by Nixon, so that he is literally the architect of corporations. But again, I think the theme of absolutely shameless, murderous profit behind every one of the people who have built this notion of corporations as people.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is not the case in every case. There are certainly very responsible companies, many of whom try to do the right thing and do the right thing. Oftentimes, though, the structure of what's given in the basic rules. And I heard once somebody say, the problem in this country isn't that there's a Statue of Liberty on the East Coast, but that there isn't a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast. Because liberty without responsibility is just simply uncontrollable. There's no, it's just out of control altogether. You have to have responsibility, and what keeps the corporate form responsible in the past were charters and rules in which ultimately we are in charge. We, you know, it's all about, started out, look at, I invite you to pick up this sort of summary of Move to Amend's path to the 28th Amendment. ultimately, who we are trying to focus on, we're not trying to focus on Congress, we're trying to get this amendment passed. Our main target is not corporations, it's not the Supreme Court, it's not regulatory agencies, it's not public officials we're electing or trying to elect. It's us. It's us. We have to change sort of the culture and the narrative about what is doable, what is acceptable, what is realizable. We have been conditioned to believe that what's going on today is inevitable, that we can't do a thing. But what has gone on, if you look at the history here, if you look at the history in a lot of places, you will see that what has gone on, the Powell memo, and others, it didn't drop out of the sky. It's not like gravity. It was done intentionally and deliberately. And what has been done intentionally and deliberately, guess what, my friends, can be undone. But will only be undone if we have the power to undo it. And we believe we can only amass the power to undo it if we truly have and justice for all, by having everybody around the table and creating a multicultural and intergenerational democracy movement that, to begin with, is trying to pass this amendment. So I invite people here to consider sticking with Move to Amend, to up your commitment, do what makes sense, and we'll